Hey everybody. So I've been learning more about and spotlighting organizations doing work at the intersection of the food system and racial justice. I found a great list of organizations on a site called CivilEats, a blog about food and social justice issues. I'll be learning more about and highlighting some of the listed groups in coming weeks, but in the meantime, I'll put a link to the list in the description for this episode. I also wanted to spotlight an organization related to my guest on the show today, Michelle Kwak. The restaurant Michelle works at, Kin in Boise, Idaho, is part of an organization called City of Good, a collective action network feeding people who are isolated or in need as a result of COVID in the city of Boise. They're currently making and delivering high-quality meals made with nutritious ingredients to vulnerable community members completely free of charge. This podcast is making a donation to City of Good, and I hope you'll consider doing the same. Their partners are currently matching donations up to $200, so your money goes even further. Find out more at cityofgood.com, and that's also a portal you can use if you're someone in Boise experiencing food insecurity. Thanks. Here's the rest of the show. Welcome to Stay for Dinner, a podcast of cooking, curiosity, and conversation. If you love cooking, hate cooking, have no idea how you feel about cooking because you've never tried it before, congratulations, you are in the right place. My name is DC Pierson. I am an author, comedian, and enthusiastic home cook. Right now, we are in my small apartment kitchen in Los Angeles, and when I first started the show, I had people over and I would cook for them and we would talk about food and cooking and everything that those are related to. But as many much more important things have had to change, so has the format of this podcast at the outset, and I have started talking to people that I couldn't have over anyway because they don't live in Los Angeles. And this week, my guest is going to be Michelle Kwak. Michelle is a pastry chef at Kin, which is a fine dining restaurant in Boise, Idaho. The good folks at Kin actually catered Haley and I's wedding last year, and they're like as cool of a bunch of people as you could ever hope to encounter. Michelle is actually going to be the first culinary professional that I have ever had on the show, and I'm so excited to talk to her. Basically, I mean, they've just had such a unique experience. They've been renovating this old restaurant space for a really long time, getting to actually officially open up their restaurant, and their grand opening happened to coincide pretty much exactly with the lockdown as a result of the pandemic. And so they had to, instead of having that grand opening, completely shift their business model and figure out what they were going to do. And it's been really exciting and inspiring to watch them do that from afar. And I'm really excited to check in with Michelle and find out first person how it's going. It's just a really unique group of people in a really unique but also kind of universal situation right now, and I'm really intrigued to hear how it's going. Before we get into that, I am going to be making Eddie Hernandez's pork roast with roasted jalapeno gravy. I've made this recipe before. I love it. It's presented by Kim Severinsen in the New York Times, and Eddie Hernandez runs the Taqueria del Sol restaurants in Georgia and Tennessee. And as Severinsen puts it, he, quote, considers himself a born-again Southern boy whose food reflects a mashup of the two cultures. Like I said, I've made this before, and it really is this awesome flavor Venn diagram. It's got this great sort of Sunday supper vibe, but it also happens to be very easy, and it just so happens to be Sunday when I feel like doing something easy. So let's do this. Before we do anything else, I am going to preheat my oven, and we're going to do 475. So I wanted to do that before I did anything else, but now that I have, I am going to do a quick check of my ingredients. I'm going to be making this makes like 8 servings. I'm going to be making half of that, so all of the ingredient amounts that I'm about to rattle off are going to be the halved amounts. You can see the full amounts in the recipe on the New York Times website. So I'm going to be using half a tablespoon of salt. I have that. Half a tablespoon of ground black pepper. I have that. It's not ground yet, but oh, it will be. half a tablespoon of granulated garlic, which I had to look it up, and that's like the dried flakes, not the powder. So half a tablespoon of granulated garlic and half a tablespoon of, while we're throwing the word granulated around, granulated onion, and then a 2.5 to 3 pound, actually, sorry, that's the non-halved amount. The halved amount would be like, the bottom line is, what it says in the recipe is a 2.5 to 3 pound boneless pork loin. What I have is a 1.25 pound pork sirloin roast. And I made it with this exact cut of meat before, and it was really good. The only drawback is that it says that the pork loin should have a good layer of fat on it. This doesn't have a ton of fat on it, but it cooks pretty fast, and it'll stay tender all the way through, or at least it did the last time I did it. In fact, the last time I did it, I pulled it out before I really should have, because I was worried about it overcooking, and I still don't have a meat thermometer. For some reason, that has not been at the top of my list of things to figure out how to get, despite me mentioning on every show that I don't have a meat thermometer, and the fact that I really enjoy having a meat thermometer when I have it. It's just the kind of thing where, do you ever be driving around and you're like, oh, I need to remember that we need blank, but you're driving, and so you have no way of actually remembering that you need that, and the only time you ever think of it is when you're behind the wheel of your car? That's how I feel about the meat thermometer. I only really think about it when I'm in the middle of cooking or when I'm talking about it on the show. So hopefully when I'm editing this, I'll hear myself say this and figure out, hey, how am I gonna get a meat thermometer global pandemic style? Okay, so that's all of my ingredients for the roast. Then over in the ingredients for the gravy, I'm gonna be using 1.5 tablespoons of butter, 2 tablespoons plus 1 teaspoon of all-purpose flour for the gravy. Actually, if I remember correctly, I think the first time I made this recipe, I couldn't figure out what that extra teaspoon was for, so we'll see. Maybe I'll figure it out doing it this time. A jalapeno that's going to be roasted after I make that roast. Then half a teaspoon of vegetable oil, half a cup of half and half. I'm actually using heavy whipping cream instead of half and half. I guess literally don't tell my heart, Billy Bob Thornton style. Billy Bob Thornton style? No, Achy Breaky Heart. Who am I thinking of? Billy Ray Cyrus, a different Billy with a little one-syllable, like, part of his first name after the Billy part. A cup of pork stock or chicken stock. Ooh, I wish I had pork stock. I don't. I'm just going to be using chicken stock. And then half a teaspoon of salt, plus more as needed. Cool, I got that stuff. Time to begin the blessedly minimal prep work for this recipe. We're going to begin by making the spice mixture. So getting out a little bowl here, my half a tablespoon of salt, half a tablespoon of ground black pepper, half a tablespoon of the granulated garlic, and half a tablespoon of the granulated onion that look almost identical to each other. Like these little beigeish, brownish flakes. And I'm excited to use them because we've had them in the pantry forever, and for whatever reason they don't get called for very much. Mixing that around. And then going to put my roast on a rack in a roasting pan. In this case, I think I'm just going to use a baking sheet, and then sprinkling it with the spice mixture all over. I'm going to check for the 90th time that there is nothing in the oven, because last week I turned the oven on to 500, and which is the highest it can go, and for whatever reason I usually check before I turn the oven on. Didn't check, and there was a loaf of bread that Haley had made in a plastic bag to keep it fresh in the oven, because we have cats and we have to hide everything in weird places to keep it from being munched on. and I forgot to check, and by the time I was like, huh, something smells like melted plastic, I opened up the oven and I had made a bread ruining art installation about, like, I don't know, consumerism? So rubbing the pork all over with the spices. All right, there we go. We are at temp. So I am going to throw the roast in. And it says to check at about 30 to 40 minutes. I'm gonna go ahead and give it the outside of the full 40, because like I said last time I did it, I think I pulled it out a little bit on the earlier side, and this one's almost exactly the same type and size. So that's what I'm going to bank on in this case, but if you're using an actual pork loin or a larger piece of meat, your mileage may certainly vary. And now that we have the roast in, we are going to make the base of our gravy, which is the roux. And it's really fun to make a roux. I feel like I did it very early on in my cooking life, like very poorly, and I just remember it kind of breaking up into the sauce that I was trying to incorporate it into, and it was like burning on the bottom of the pan. And I realized I just said that it's fun, and then I'm describing a horrific cooking experience, but it really is fun. It's very, it's neat to see the way it comes together, and then the way that it affects the texture of a sauce and really gives it that, for lack of a better term, gravy-like consistency, because it's going to be a gravy. So we're going to put a small saucepan over medium heat. And we are going to melt our 1.5 tablespoons of butter in said pan. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to actually measure out my flour, because we're going to toss that in once the butter gets all melted. I don't want the butter to brown while I'm waiting. So I need 2 tablespoons of all-purpose flour. Not making very much. Got that in a little bowl. Measure out my tablespoons of butter using the handy-dandy lines on the side of the stick. Put the butter in the pan, swirl it around. All right, the butter's all melted. I'm going to get a whisk at the ready, and then tip in my flour, and as the recipe says, whisk vigorously until smooth. They're still whisking, because when the mixture thins and starts to bubble to reduce the heat. All right, so it's getting thinner, a little more liquidy. We're going to turn it down to low, slow down my whisking. So I'm just going to, as the recipe says, whisk slowly for a minute or two. Wait until I get a nutty scent, but it's still light colored. And coincidentally, I think I have just gotten there, so I'm going to pull it off and let it cool on the sidelines. And what I've probably edited out is the 96 times that our smoke detector has gone off. Super sensitive. On the plus side, theoretically we'll know if there's ever an actual fire. And mostly it just keeps us aware of when we're cooking something at all. And that's kind of all we're doing till the roast is done. I am going to serve this with a little bit of rice as a starch and probably some sauteed greens. So I'm gonna go ahead and address those things on the side here while I wait for the roast to be done. All right, my timer just went off. I'm gonna take the pork out and let it rest for about 10 minutes. Ooh, it's a really nice color on it. Actually, way nicer than I got last time, which leads me to believe it's probably also more done than the last time I made it, the first time I pulled it out, which leads me to believe that hopefully it's not undercooked. We will find out. Gonna let it rest and kind of let the juices settle before I cut into it. And in the meantime, I'm gonna take my jalapeno and paint it with a little bit of olive oil and then put it in a little roasting pan of its own, or just a little anything oven safe basically, and put that in the oven, which I'm going to lower to 450. And that roasted jalapeno is the roasted jalapeno that gives the roasted jalapeno gravy its name and roasted jalapeno flavor. All right, the recipe calls for putting the jalapeno in for about 6 minutes. The last time I did it, after 6 minutes, it wasn't super cooked, so I might give it more like 10 minutes. All right, a few seconds left to go here on my jalapeno. I'm gonna check on it, see how it's looking. Pretty nice, there's some good blistering on it. I'll put it back in for like 2 minutes after flipping it. All right, it's been in there for about 12 minutes, about twice as long as projected by the recipe, and I just opened the oven again and it's smelling really good. There's some nice blistering on either side. Now it's kind of like puffed up, looks really good, and it smells awesome. There's just this really nice floral jalapeno smell. So I'm gonna pull that out, and when it's cool enough to handle, I'm going to dice it. All right, the jalapeno is probably cool enough now. Going to, well, cool enough with some tongs maybe. Ooh yeah, some nice color on there. Take it to a cutting board, cut the stem off, and then it says basically you can remove as much of the, cutting board is janking around. You can remove as much of the seeds and stems as you want to, or not the seeds and stems, Jesus, this is not a early 90s West Coast rap song. The seeds and ribs inside, I am going to leave them all intact because that's where the spice is and that's what I want. All right. Putting the diced jalapeno in a saucepan with half a cup of half and half, or in my case, heavy cream. And it's just that we don't use half and half for much else. That is the excuse that I will go with. And then also gonna put in the cup of stock. Also going to throw a teaspoon of salt in there and put it over some heat, bring it to a boil. Then once it gets up to a boil, I'm going to reduce the heat to medium. So just keeping an eye on that until it comes up to temperature. And while I do that, I'm going to do a step I wouldn't necessarily have to do if I had a meat thermometer, which is cutting my pork to see how done it is. Feels pretty done. Oh yeah, it's cooked through. Might even be a little overcooked. Might have overcompensated this time. That's okay, it's got a really nice crust on it, and even if it gets a little dried out, the gravy is gonna add some nice moisture, so I feel okay about swinging in the other direction, because last time I had to put it back in the oven like 6 different times. So would like a little bit of, just a little bit of that pink in the center that you are now allowed to have in pork. Didn't quite get there, a little bit over, but that's okay. All right, gravy is coming up to, or gravy base rather, is coming up to a boil. So I'm going to reduce the heat to medium and let that cook for about 5 minutes to let the flavors from the roasted jalapeno kind of get imbued into the liquid. And then after that's done, I'm going to start stirring in my roux. All right, now the gravy base is over a nice healthy simmer. I am going to just help it along with the occasional stir just to make sure that everything's moving around, nothing's burning. Doesn't really feel in danger of that, but with dairy. I feel like you never know. All right. My gravy base is a little bit reduced. I don't want to over reduce it because it's nice to be able to pour the gravy kind of all over the plate and the pork and the starch and everything. And so I'm going to start stirring in some roux. I'm going to start with a couple of tablespoons. Ooh, the pan that I had it in is hot, so I got to grab a little oven mitt here. Going to whisk that in. Should thicken everything up. And I just realized what sense memory this gravy is giving me, which is when I worked at a grocery store in high school, I would oftentimes, my lunch break, buy like frozen macaroni and cheese. It had a little bit of like jalapeno in it. It was like a frozen spicy macaroni and cheese. And that's the sense memory that I get from this gravy. There's not actually cheese in it, of course, but something about the dairy and the thickness that you get. It's almost a cheesy sauce without being cheesy. And then obviously the jalapeno. And I love it. I love that combination. Stirring the gravy around. It's not getting super thick. I might put in a little bit more roux for thickness, but don't want to go overboard because, again, if it's a little looser, it spreads better on and over the food. All right, there we go. That last bit of roux really seemed to do it. Came together in a nice, satisfyingly melty but still thick gravy consistency. Going to taste it for seasoning, etc. All right, I'm going to break in here just to say, if you have a podcast recorder and it keeps telling you that the memory card is almost full, don't be surprised if eventually the memory card is full, especially when you are finishing cooking your pork roast and roasted jalapeno gravy. That's what happened to me. That's why you're not going to hear the last 30 seconds or so of this cooking segment, but rest assured, it turned out pretty darn good. I think the gravy ultimately could have used a little more salt, so I added a little more salt at the table, but other than that, everything was delicious. I liked how it turned out. In the meantime, please enjoy this conversation with Michelle Kwak, and she actually was at the restaurant where they were preparing for another outdoor event, and so it's a working space, and you'll hear that, but I think that just adds to the ambiance. I really enjoyed talking to Michelle. Please enjoy. So, Michelle Kwak, thank you so much for joining me on the show all the way live and direct from Boise, Idaho. If this were a normal episode of the show, I would be placing a plate of hopefully delicious food in front of you. But since it is not a normal episode of the show, all I can do is just hope that the last thing that you ate was delicious and satisfying.
Absolutely. And thanks for having me. And I can't wait to dive into that meal that I'm thinking you're going to freeze off and save for the future, maybe.
Yes, exactly. I'm going to make it today and put it in the freezer. And then eventually, when I record enough episodes like this, we're going to have to buy a new freezer.
Sounds good. Sounds like a good problem.
Not too bad. It could be worse. So you are the pastry chef at Kin.
Yep, that's right.
You all, so I was thinking about, or I was sort of recounting the timeline, and let me know if I have it correct. How long was the process of the sort of like renovation of this old space leading to what was going to be the opening of, like, the official opening of Kin?
Well, that's kind of an interesting question, interesting timeline. So when we first came into this space, it was about, it was just shy of 2 years, like maybe a year and 9 months ago or something. And the space was supposed to be a temporary home for us. We had another spot here in downtown Boise. And so this place, it was formerly a restaurant called Angels. And so we just kind of call it the Angel space. This was supposed to be a temporary 1-year home, and the work that we were doing to renovate it, it was just enough to get these 2 temporary bars open. It wasn't, this our big renovations for this big project that we had. It was just, let's do enough to make this space work for us. But it was a few months after being in this space when we realized this is actually a really rad location. The plans for the other location that we had our eyes on, those got scrapped. New design was made up for this space. So I think once that started rolling out, that was about maybe a year and a half ago. And just a little over a year ago, maybe April of 2019 is when we started demoing this space. So it's been a little over a year and a couple months of demoing the construction, all the finished work. Now we've got booze on the bar. Yeah, yeah.
It seemed like from the outside and knowing y'all and following you on social media and stuff, like it was heading towards you guys opening officially as a functioning indoor restaurant. And then like right then is when the pandemic struck and like lockdown happened.
Yeah. We had hired on our staff. We had 25 people ish on payroll at the beginning of February. And a couple weeks later, everyone got laid off. Like I think we all went through one pay cycle and then everyone got laid off. And we had bulked up our crew getting ready to open. So restaurants in Boise started opening this past month. And we've been doing a weekend delivery service thing for the last, I think the last 2 months. Sorry, this season is a little bit of a blur.
Sure.
And we would be allowed to open our indoor space and we could technically seat people, but we don't feel comfortable doing that. Like we don't feel comfortable exposing our people, to guests coming in. We're still trying to figure things out. We started this outdoor event called the Picnic, and that was this past weekend. Yeah, so I don't know when we're going to officially open the indoor space, but we've already started kind of doing some stuff outdoors, and we're hoping to keep rolling that out through the summer or as long as we can.
Yeah, so I should say like extra thank you for taking the time to do this, because if I'm not mistaken, you guys are just coming off like literally, we're recording on a Monday and you guys are coming off literally this past weekend doing your first like outdoor seated event. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is. So yeah, it was our first big kin event here at our space. We would love for it to have been, our indoor dining experience that we've been, hoping to do for the last couple of years. But it was different. It's not what we had planned, but it was fun. It gave people a little semblance of normalcy in their lives, and it felt really good and it felt really safe. We had a band / dance group, LED, come and perform. And so the performance and picnic meal was Saturday, Sunday, and we've got another one this coming Wednesday.
Oh, wow. That's a quick turnaround.
Yeah, we've been limiting the tickets to 50, and everyone is able to spread out really comfortably. The spaces are already pre-marked, and then we have the outer boundary roped off, and we've also encouraged people just to, people who are passing by on their strollers or bikes or skateboards. We've just encouraged them to stay outside the boundaries, and they're welcome to approach the shows. And people have been doing that very respectfully and keeping their distance and being masked. And moving forward, we would love to work with local bands to have them come and perform. Because, who feels safe going to an indoor music venue,
Totally.
But we also want to support these other local artists and provide opportunities for a community to come and listen to them and enjoy them as well.
That's awesome. Yeah, I should say for people that don't know the space, you guys are at the like ground floor or even maybe below the ground floor of this really big downtown Boise, like large, typical downtown office building. And when you all took it over, it was kind of this, it seemed like sort of old boys club kind of steakhousey vibe, like the type of restaurants that like a Bennigan's would be based on, if I'm not mistaken, like very sort of like brass rails and kind of green leather sort of a vibe. And outside of that, you step down into this like kind of large outdoor amphitheater, and that's what you guys are using for these events. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah. So we're on this kind of the southern edge of downtown, and the space is very unique because we have this awesome grassy knoll, that amphitheater space, and this is where the original. I'm not sure if you're aware, but the Idaho Shakespeare Festival started here. So there's a big grassy seating area. There's an area where we've had bands set up and plenty of space for people to walk around for performances to happen. We also have a patio, a concrete patio seating area. And so it's a very unique outdoor space that we have here in Boise. And the sidewalk and the cars that park on the at the intersection, it allows for a nice buffer. So even in traffic, when there's a bunch of cars coming by, you get buffered by that. The space that you speak of, the old, boys club type space. I would love for you and Haley, when y'all hopefully come in a couple months, to come down here and see the space. It is totally different.
Just the pictures I've seen look totally incredible and completely different.
Yeah, it's really beautiful.
That's awesome. So I want to hear like the ins and outs of like how you feel this weekend went and everything like that. But first, before we do that, I kind of want to go all the way back. How did you, because I'm very excited that you're like the first, culinary professional that I've been able to talk to on the show. Most people that have come on, are home cooks or just people who don't even necessarily approach home cooking. How did you find yourself, in this year, 2020, the official year of things didn't go according to plan, but how did you find yourself as, this amazing professional pastry chef working at this awesome, innovative restaurant? Like, how did you find yourself here? Take me all the way back, as far back as you feel like going.
Okay. Well, I guess it started, I'm going to take you back to 2008. I feel like that was a long time ago.
It feels like the longest time ago, perhaps.
I think it was 2008, maybe 2000. Yeah. So I was a high school science teacher for about 7 or 8 years. And I decided to take a sabbatical from that. It was just going to be a year off. Went to culinary school, decided I wasn't going to go back to teaching. At that time, we were in the East Coast, living in Jersey, working in New York, and spent a couple years there in New York in fine dining as a pastry cook. Worked with a lot of incredible people. And just my personality, I'm the type, I always want to learn things the best way, the right way, the first time. So I found the best pastry chefs there and sent them emails or just went up to them and said, hey, I would love to come and work for you. And at that time you could spend time in a restaurant for free. People would do stages and restaurants would have stages, like people coming in, spending time in the kitchen, unpaid. Now there's been changes in the labor law. So I believe in New York now you do need to pay stages. But I would tell them, hey, I will come and sift your flour and sugar if that's like all you need. And I'll do that every day, all day. Because for me, just being there and observing what they were doing would have been enough for me. And so that's what I was doing there in New York. Well, not sifting flour, but you're working there as a pastry cook for And we moved to Boise. My husband and I moved to Boise just over 8 years ago. And I started working with a nonprofit that was involved in food training for people that have barriers to employment, like refugees, people coming out of incarceration, stuff like that. And after about 2 years working there, I wanted to get back into restaurants. There was a restaurant just 0.9 miles down the road from my house called State and Lemp. And my husband kept telling me, like, oh, you should go check that place out. Their style of food, it seems like it would jive with what your background is. And for me, it's not just about making like food that's tasty. For me, food and pastry, it's medium for artwork. It just so happens that the medium I get to use is edible. And so I went over there, I dropped off my resume. When I staged there, I think I cleaned ramps for, I don't know, hours. It was like a few cases. And so we joke about that every year. And it was just a comfortable crew of people who that they did good food, like food that was tasty. They were very intentional about where it was coming from, working directly with the farmers, the growers, the ranchers, and doing high quality work. And it's kind of unusual to find places that are doing high quality work and they care about the food and the guests, but even more so, they care about the people who are there. So we were there together at State and Lemp for, I think I was there for 4 years. And then when that project came to an end, we were simultaneously starting this new restaurant project. So most of us from State and Lemp moved on to this project, which we call KIN, K-I-N, and it means family. It represents the family that we are, that we've been for even prior to the KIN project, and the family that we continue to be, the family that our newest person joined us just 3 days ago. And,
whoa,
his reaction was just like, I get it. Like, I feel a part of this. And I think I can confidently say that everyone who works with us like feels the love and the care that we all have for each other. So that's kind of I don't know how long that took, but that's sort of what got me here and why I continue to be here.
How did being a high school science teacher affect or influence or even if just in opposition, inform your career as a chef?
Well, for me, I've always had a fascination with food. It might be like food insecurity at times growing up. But I feel like food has always been a relatable thing. When I was a kid, anytime we could create our own project for school, like design whatever, I always gravitated towards edible projects, like an edible model of the solar system or an edible, and as a science teacher, when I would come up with analogies to describe things, like whether it was, for my physics class or chemistry or biology, I always found myself making analogies that were food related because I feel like people can relate to food. Like we all eat. The only people I don't really relate to are the ones who eat to survive, like the ones who don't enjoy eating. Like that's probably the unrelatable, relatable folks. But I found that kids, high school kids, relate to food. They're always hungry. They're growing. They have preferences, and so food has always been a part of that. Now, working in the kitchen, where I see science coming into play. When we're making stuff, whether I'm baking or doing something in the pastry world, or whether the guys on the savory side are making something, if something doesn't go according to plans, we think about, well, what did we change here? Did we increase the wet ingredient, the dry ingredient? Was there an effect of pH on this? Is that why something didn't set up properly? And the interesting thing is here at KIN, we have a number of people who come from a science background. So Chris, one of the co-owners and the executive chef, he was also a biology major. Like we were both bio majors, and he was going to go to med school, and he's like a super smart guy. But a lot of us here have science backgrounds, and I mean, food is science, right?
It is so interesting. It's something that I wish I understood more, quite frankly. Is I was never much of a science kid, and I often find myself wishing that I understood the kind of the underpinning of how things work. I was talking about last week how one of the only things I feel remotely confident about in the kitchen in terms of science is sort of like, I mean, a lot of times if you have too much water on something or there's too much moisture on something, it won't brown. And once the moisture cooks off, then it might be able to brown. But if there's not, then that's like the only thing I know, right? Like that's the only vaguely remotely and maybe I don't understand the science of it because I don't even understand why. I just know that that's true on some level and is kind of one of the only sort of like remotely sciencey things that I've come to understand that I feel like I actually use and think about when I'm cooking myself. But like when you were saying like, oh yeah, there's, the pH might be whatever. I just hear that and I go like, okay, I just know it from deodorant commercials and not understanding it in science class because I was never that person. But I understand that. I mean, we talk about like acid in food and that being so important, but I don't, I guess it's something that I wish I understood the connection between more. And I wish that there had been more science teachers, I guess, like, and people presenting, food metaphors. Cause I think you're totally right. I loved food. That's probably what I was thinking about when I wasn't paying attention in science class. Did you feel like there were any particular metaphors or projects or things that you were able to use that approach that you felt like kids really connected to?
Well, so when I was teaching physics, but just about every year, we would do this egg drop experiment where, you have an egg and the idea is DC, this was, I don't know, so long ago when I taught physics, but the challenge would be for the students to create a vessel for the egg to sit in, and when you drop it, or how did I do it? I did it two different ways. Like, so one version was you would have a vessel that you put the egg in, and then you drop it from, let's say, 20 feet, and this vessel that contains the egg needs to keep the egg uncracked. Then
Sure.
The other version was the landing pad for the egg. So there would be a naked egg dropped from 20 feet or whatever the height was, and it would have to land onto the landing pad, and that landing pad would have to absorb that energy and prevent the egg from cracking. And a lot of the kids, I think what they went to was they thought about food. They thought about, okay, well, what I would love to fall into a bed of marshmallows, or thinking about the texture that we have of the foods that we eat in our mouth, and translating that to something that would be a good thing for the eggs to land in. And I don't know if it was my fascination with foods and textures and whatever's that I had then influenced the kids into making it edible. I'm always talking about food.
Right.
But the egg drop would just be one example.
I remembered we didn't do that in physics class. I actually did that in like, we had like, basically it was shop class, but it was called industrial technology in middle school. Mm-hmm. We had not the landing pad version, but we had the egg inside of some sort of vessel version of it. We might have even put it in like a rocket or something and it had to come down. Maybe we were just dropping it. I can't remember. I might be conflating various projects, but I remember it ended up, you had to put the egg in a plastic bag so that it wouldn't break everywhere, like when it broke. And I feel like I ended up, and I'm not sure whose idea it was, because I think a number of us did it, but like putting that little Ziploc bag inside of another Ziploc bag full of water. And what we ended up realizing was that it sort of didn't matter at that point what other stuff you had in your rocket or vehicle or egg container or whatever. Mm-hmm. Like that alone would often, I feel like all the ones that had the egg in a bag of water, like it was like, it didn't matter what else was going on. The egg was fine. It was totally cool. And I remember feeling like we hacked the egg project. So when you decided to sort of go to culinary school, seek out pastry chefs, like what made you decide to make that transition?
Sure. So when I was a teacher, pretty much every day I would come home and cook. And it was my way of winding down from the day. I think a lot of people, they go home and they veg out in front of the TV. Now, don't get me wrong. I do like watching TV, but my problem is I can't just watch 30 minutes. Like the reason why I don't watch TV is because for me, watching TV would always be a binge. It'll be a 3, 4, 5 hour time suck. And I just choose not to do that. Like I can't just watch 30 minutes. Right. So for me, making food, cooking every day was fun for me, and it was winding down for me. It was a way that I could relax. Now, I'm not really exactly doing that much cooking at home anymore these days. But when I decided I wasn't going to come back and teach that following school year, I had two thoughts in mind. Either I would go to culinary school, or I wanted to apply to the Fashion Institute just to learn how to do
Oh.
pattern making, sewing, stuff like that. Because I also like clothes. I thrift a lot of my clothes, but those are the two things. And going to culinary school, I thought I would learn how to cook, do things that would. Uh, my plan was to go back into education and somehow be a part of reforming school lunches there where I was living.
Mm,
Like I was a teacher in Newark, um,
mm.
and kids there's just not a lot of access to good, healthy, nutritious food that's also tasty. And I was inspired by Alice Waters and what other chefs around the country, the world were doing. But of course, I didn't go into school like lunches. I am a pastry chef. I'm doing like the opposite end of, and it's something honestly these days, like something that I struggle with. Like I struggle all the time with, I am dealing with dairy and sugar and things that are contributing to diabetes and cancer and these things that are killing our country, things that are killing poor people. It's a constant struggle. And what I remind myself, like two things. Number one, I can change what desserts could look like. Like they don't have to be these huge portions, like they can be smaller. They can also be made maybe healthier. And, for me, it's my creative outlet. Doing pastry is my creative outlet. So I'm not always making everything I'm eating every day. But what I am doing is I'm making artwork which satisfies me in that way. So it's something I still struggle with and something that I work through, each day.
I mean, speaking from our own experience, my own experience with literally eating your food when you and the rest of the kin folks catered Haley and I's wedding, and these desserts that you made as the last course for the meal that were these really just so wonderfully indulgent, but like small, you didn't make a giant cake, right? It was like everybody got a few of these little bites of, I don't want to get it wrong exactly what they would be called. I don't know if they were like profiteroles or what they were, but these tiny pastries, these tiny, perfect little bites that were so satisfying. And it was completely that, like it was these small portions that you could eat and completely feel like you got this indulgent dessert experience without eating, because this is also coming at the end of a like big wedding meal. We could eat it and feel like we were having something that was indulgent and a treat and special and something that I obviously still remember very fondly and always will, without it being a giant, a huge thing that was coursing, that chocolate was running down the face of.
Yeah, yeah. And when you're doing an event or attending an event and there's desserts, I like things that are one or two biters because I want to try a bunch of things. And I also know that there are people who don't eat dessert, or maybe for them what's satisfying is just that one little piece of chocolate, and that's all they need. So I don't want to give someone this. Again, I don't like huge portions of stuff, but I don't want to give someone this big portion if they're just going to take a bite out of it and throw the rest away, because I hate wasting food. Um,
Sure.
and I also like trying a bunch of stuff, and I want to give people the opportunity to try 3, 4, 5 different things, but also give people the option to not try 3, 4, 5 different things if they just don't really care for it. It's fun doing the little one biters, yeah, like the little mignardies and the profiteroles for y'all's wedding. It's fun, and it causes people also to take a closer look and make the decision of what it is that they want to eat and like why they want to eat it.
What would you say are, I mean, obviously, like people who are musicians or writers or filmmakers or whatever sort of have their favorite, like, these are my, when I go to listen to music or when I go to make a movie or when I go to, or when I go to rather watch a movie or whatever, blah, 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 blah. Different artists have their different sort of like their favorite things. Like, what would you say are there sort of like guiding, like, flavors or just types of desserts or things that you always come back to as like, that is what I want to eat when I'm having dessert?
Um, that's interesting. I don't crave. So when I think about uh, what's going to be the last meal when I die, I've had this answer for years and years. It's bibimbap. It's this Korean like mixed rice vegetable bowl thing. I don't ever think about dessert. I've never thought, what's the last thing I want to eat before I die? And I know that that wasn't your question, but I'm satisfied with a bowl of vanilla ice cream, like just a scoop of good ice cream. When I do crave sweets, I think I find myself looking for a little, just like a piece of chocolate. I wouldn't say it's my favorite thing. I was gonna, you know what dessert's really satisfying to me? One of my favorites, pavlovas. So a meringue with some kind of whipped cream and topped with fruit. I like it because there's a lot of textures. Like the meringue is crispy on the outside and a little chewy in the inside. Then you've got the cream. And what the way I like to do it, I like to make a lemon curd and whip some cream into that. And we actually had that at the picnic this weekend, a little mini one bite version. And then top it with whatever fruit is in season, preferably berries. So I'm always making pavlovas throughout the summer, whether it's a quick dessert to take over to a friend's for dinner or something that we offer as one of our menu-des because it's gluten-free. So it makes it one that a lot of people can eat. And for people who are dairy-free, I would whip up some other kind of cream, like whether it's like coconut cream or whatever else, or fill it with something that's dairy-free. But I think pavlovas are probably one of my favorite desserts.
Haley started making them. She's made them a few times in the past year or so when we've had fruit. And I think also now having a like a stand mixer we didn't have for a long time has definitely allowed her meringue and like whipped cream game to be stepped up, to not be having to hand mix everything. And it's so good. I know exactly what you mean in terms of just that meringue. Like really anytime you bite into it, it's just like, where has this been all my life? It's
Right.
It's like cotton candy went to an Ivy League school. It's so tremendous. Ooh, that sounds great. And it sounds so summery. That's so cool that you guys, that you did that this weekend. It sounds like perfect for like an outdoor event.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a nice little one biter. We had like 5 different little menu-des in there. So the picnic that was set up, each guest, when they arrived, we had a table set up for them on the hill. So it was a zero contact event. We had tables set up. There was a tiffin lunch container at their table that had the food already inside of it.
Whoa.
And are you familiar with tiffins? They're these, they're originally from India. I believe they're these tiered containers. So imagine.
Oh, I think I've seen these before. Sorry, you were saying.
Oh yeah. So yeah, just imagine like a 3 levels of stainless cylinder bowls stacked on top of each other. The bottom layer had soba noodles that were made here in the house on a sauce. And the middle layer had pork buns, and the buns were made by our baker Tanner. And then the upper level had a set of 5 little one bite menu-des and then a little breakfast snack for people to take home the next day. And so this was like all set up at the tables so they could course out their meal or eat it however way they wanted to. And it was a really fun way to do it. And I liked having the menu-des because it's the first. It's the top container, and when they open it up, it just looks like a little, in the wintertime when you get, I don't know if you grew up getting these, but my mom every winter would buy these tins of the Danish shortbread cookies, and you open it up, it's like all these different little paper cookies in them.
Yeah.
So that was how it got inspired. I was like, when they open it up, I just want them to see like all these like little cookies, like all these like little presents. Christmas in June. We're in June.
That's so neat. Yeah, it seems like, I don't know. It seems as though that thought process that you're describing, going like from, the giant sort of like circumstance with a capital C that we're all dealing with in one way or another with the global pandemic, and sort of thinking about, okay, how does that affect the situation that we're in? We're a restaurant, so we still want to be making food for people and we want them to be able to come and eat and enjoy, and kind of like that going all the way down to like, okay, then we're going to have these specific kind of metal containers that they're going to come and get, and it's like a picnic and it's going to be safe and all these things, all the way down to like, okay, me, Michelle, the pastry chef, this is my sort of canvas, right? Is this metal container, and then thinking about how I'm going to turn that into something cool and specific and neat, and it triggering this specific memory is so cool. I mean, that is truly like, you know, I'm not surprised because I really admire you and I really admire what y'all do, but it is so neat. And I feel like just such a good example of what it seems, you know, what I think you all have always done. It seems like in terms of adapting to different spaces and different presentations and stuff, but it seems to typify what I've seen, like from very much afar, how you guys have approached the, you know, still serving food within the pandemic and stuff. So you touched on it a little bit before, but the kin concept has kind of taken on a couple of different forms as you've been adapting to the pandemic and serving people in different ways. How have those different styles or formats, you know, at home, a picnic, whatever, how have those affected how you make your work? How have you approached those?
So I personally, I like consistency. I like saying, like, I like to know what I'm going into the next day, the next week, the next month. So this has been initially a real, I mean, it continues to be a challenge, but I wouldn't, I've been telling a number of people this the last couple of weeks, as someone who likes consistency and likes to know what I'm going into, I wouldn't do this project with anyone else. I've been working with Chris and Raimi for 6 years now. And as uncomfortable as I feel sometimes about just the situation that we're in with COVID and the uncertainty of the future, while there's that, I feel very confident in who I get to work with and how we're approaching all of this. Like anytime we have any concerns, like those concerns get addressed. So we currently have, I don't know, like 3-4 different projects going on. We've been doing the delivery meals Fridays and Saturdays. So those are meal kits that we put together. Like we complete 80-90% of the prep work, and the guests at home, they finish the rest of it, whether it's tossing the salad and the herbs together, heating up the sauce, searing off the protein, plating up the dessert. And so that's one of the things that we've got going on. Another one we just started this past weekend was the picnic that we've been talking about. And then there's a nonprofit that we helped launch called City of Good. And so it was us and there's like a handful of other restaurants here in downtown Boise. And we are providing meals to people who have food insecurities, providing meal kits, like weekend meal kits to kids who receive free lunch from their schools. But, you know, in the summertime, they don't have food. And in the weekends, so kids get kids who are getting free meals are getting free meals Monday through Friday. But then there's this gap on the weekend, Friday dinner through Sunday dinner. And so us, along with we and some of the other restaurants, we are putting these meal kits together so that kids have breakfast, lunch, and dinner through the weekend. And so that's just, you know, like another little project. I feel like there's other ones that we're either thinking about or. Yeah.
That's phenomenal, though. I mean, that's, you know, you think about transforming this restaurant concept that you guys have and then still trying to stay afloat as a business and you know, provide jobs for as many people as possible and keep people working and stuff and keep your, you know, trying to keep your team together as much as possible. And then to add on to that, to be, you know, making food for other people and people that are in need in general. And then particularly, obviously, communities that are vulnerable in general and are marginalized in general become even more so right now and even more exposed and are kind of the first ones to sort of feel the pinch, so to speak. That's incredible. I mean, it's really cool. I don't have a really great end to that thought. That's really neat. Do you feel like working with the nonprofit that you started with when you moved to Boise, has that kind of informed how you approach that or shaped how you approach doing that work?
Yeah, and I think there was a piece of that. So the nonprofit I was working with, it was called Create. It's called Create Common Good, and it was originally set up as a program for refugees. Um, and then, as I was there, we had also started taking on folks coming out of domestic abuse situations. And I had, when I was a school teacher, most of the kids that I worked with, it was like an underserved population. And now it's like I got to working with a nonprofit. It was working with the same demographic, but like their parents, you know? And I think in my life, I gravitate towards jobs that not just like satisfies me doing the things I love to do, whether it's teaching or cooking or whatever, but also things that, for me, it's important to always be a part of doing things that are good, you know, like
Mm-hmm.
that benefit the community somehow. And granted, the people who are coming in and going to be patrons of Kin, they're not the, it's not going to be like the severely disadvantaged, like economically disadvantaged folks, but we've also been very intentional about the ways that we give back. Your mother-in-law, Margaret, who I absolutely love, she
Who's been talked about often on the show.
this is this is actually an interest. So we were making a bunch of meals um, for our staff and for people who've been laid off, for people in the community. So we've had these frozen meals, but sometimes getting these meals distributed to the people who need them can be a tricky thing. But there were a couple families that I got connected with through one of my old students at Create Common Good. So he connected me with them. But at that time, I was just in the weeds here and busy. And it's like, we've got this food. I just don't have the time to take it over. And I love Margaret so much. And Margaret was like, she's always, every time I see her, she's like, like what, like if there's anything I can do to help. And I was like, well, actually, Margaret, there are these three families and we have the food. We know these people. I just don't have that hour in my day right now. And so she so graciously came and picked it up, drove it over there, did all the deliveries. And this past Saturday was our first picnic experience. And she was so sweet. She went over to one of our favorite little coffee shops across the street, Necker, and bought a big pot of coffee for the crew. Yeah, so thank you, Margaret.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, she's the best. And talk about somebody with boundless energy and really, yeah, I think is always looking for ways to help other people. It's amazing. Like as she ended up revealing to us, or she's been, and a lot of people can't say this about their parents or their in-laws, I think extraordinarily good about observing, quarantine and safe distancing and all this different stuff, and really, really good about it. And revealed to us a couple of weeks ago, or revealed to Haley when they were talking, that she had been doing a thing with the one of the farms there, Fiddler's Green, of going and socially distant, but going and separating out and filling different farm boxes that they've been doing for the farmers market, and I think giving away to people experiencing food insecurity and stuff, and where it's just sort of like, oh, she's just been doing this like on the side, like every a couple days a week for the past several weeks, and it's just like, oh, by the way, yeah, no, I've been doing that, whatever. It's just like she's always up to something, and it's usually very helping somebody who needs it. I think it's great. I'll keep her. I'll sign on again for another year. I'll take it. Are you, I guess the main question that this all leaves me with is just like, are you exhausted? I mean, I can't imagine you guys, you've been doing so much stuff.
So this past, Sunday? Today's Monday, right?
Today's Monday.
So yesterday was Sunday. Saturday. So Saturday was the first day in a week when I went home the same day I came to work.
Oh.
So, I mean, I also, the way I'm not like busting my ass like 20, like every minute I'm here. I'll go and take a little lunch break, or I'll lay out in the grass, or whatever. I'll enjoy my time while I'm at work. But for the last like week, I was coming in about, I don't know, 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning, and then consistently leaving about 2 or 3 in the morning. Like I would get home about 2:30, 3 o'clock each morning. And I didn't realize how exhausted I was until Saturday. I came home and we had some friends. They were staying in like our back house, and they were just hanging out back there. And I came into the backyard, and DC, I started crying. It was so embarrassing, but I was bawling. And Ryan and Cindy, our friends from Salt Lake, they were like, well, like, are you okay? And well, if it makes you feel better, I think we're thinking of moving. I don't know if I'm supposed to say this, but they're thinking of moving here to Boise. And I was just blubbering through my tears, like, you better, you can't say news like this and then not follow through. And I people, and I didn't realize how exhausted I was until I started crying. But I'm taking today off. I mean, I'm here at Kin. I'm here at sitting in the bar right now. But I'm not working today. I'm here. I reheated a biscuit and I'm drinking some cold coffee. I'm definitely not working today. Yeah. I'm a little tired.
I also like that you have such a high resting level of being at work, that for you not being at work means being at work and doing a podcast. Yeah.
I'm doing it here because at home, Ron's been working from home for the last, I don't know, like 3 months. And there isn't a place I can go where we can't both be doing a call at the same time.
Yes. Yes. Gotcha.
That's part of the reason.
Yeah. Haley and I are in a similar situation. Sorry, you were saying?
Oh no. Yeah. And I just also love being here. Was it?
One thing that you had touched on that I think is really interesting is that, since you are, cooking is your life, that's how you earn a living, you're a chef, like that I have heard other people in the culinary world touch on, is that when that becomes true, you're maybe not cooking at home as much as you might otherwise. And you sort of touched on that. Have you found that to be true?
Yeah and no. Me not cooking at home, it's not because I don't like cooking at home, but it's because in this season I've been really busy and I just don't have the time. I'm at home for 6 hours maybe.
Yeah.
And so during that time, half an hour of that is hanging out with the dog. 3 or 4 hours of that is sleeping. But and that's part of the reason. Part of the other reason why I'm not cooking at home is we've been making family meals here, and we have food. I absolutely hate wasting food, DC. So when we have family meals, and if there's enough left over for people to take home, but not enough for us to eat as another family meal, then I might like take a portion of that home, just so it doesn't go to waste, like just so
Sure.
that there's not food being thrown away in the garbage. So that's what Ron's been eating for the last few weeks. Also, I guess I'm not doing a lot of cooking because I eat a lot of salads, and I feel like salad is not really cooking because it's picking and washing and throwing dressing on. But in the summertime, I survive on salads because I love salads. So I feel like I make salads almost every day, but to me, that's not cooking,
Man, for me, it's so much more cooking than actually turning heat on is, because I'm so disinclined to just make a fresh salad, even though I like them more and more as a grown up, and especially now during quarantine, where it hasn't been just sort of like, oh, you can go to the store and get whatever, or maybe you can get a salad for lunch or whatever at some place. I find myself craving them more and more. But yeah, for me, that's actually way more daunting than turning the stove on, I feel like.
Yeah.
What is your back pocket salad dressing or approach to dressing? Like, what do you like in a salad dressing? Like when you sit down to just have a good solid, like I can throw this on whatever's in the crisper kind of dressing. How do you approach that?
So For me, salads, there's like kind of two categories of salads. There's the hangover salad. So I've never understood the greasy, like the greasy spoon hangover food. Like I don't want fries, and I I'm being hungover is not a regular thing for me. But I'm thinking like late night after you've had like a couple drinks. Like I like to. My ideal food is Caesar salad. Um,
Mm.
so so I feel like Caesar salad is its own category. I love Caesar salads. The favorite would be the just like the plain romaine with good croutons, parm, and your classic Caesar salad dressing. I don't need for it to be grilled. I don't want tomatoes on my Caesar salad. It's just like a very classic, simple Caesar salad. But in the summertime, salads, what that looks like for me is mostly vinaigrettes. I pick we have a garden at home, and I grow a lot of mustard greens. So my summer salads usually have a lot of mustard greens in them. I
Ooh.
usually pick a few pounds each day, and I bring it here to the kitchen, and we wash it and use that for. So most of our family salad, or family meal salads, are just like whatever I've picked from the garden that day, and then whatever produce gets donated to us from Charlie's Produce, one of our local distributors that have been bringing us uh, random fun free stuff. Yeah, so that's kind of what my salads look like. I'm a really thrifty person, so my salads we just kind of call them trash salads. Not that it's like trash stuff, but what do we have around that we want to use up that needs to get used up, and that's my typical salad.
Well, that's nice. I mean, it definitely it helps me free my mind a little bit to be able to think of because I when I think of approaching a salad, I think like, okay, I can't transform any of this with heat, so it's got to be perfect. I think thinking of it as a trash salad is a little bit more of a, it's a little less daunting, I think. And also too, just knowing that feeling of like opening the crisper and being like, what is literally about to turn into slop that I need to use like right away.
Yeah, like if things are beyond what would go into a salad, then it goes into what I call my compost smoothie.
Mm.
Yeah. And
And is
then
that literally a smoothie?
yes, so I if there's like strawberries that are a little bit too soft, or it's like
Uh,
maybe the raspberry next to this raspberry had a little mold on it, so this raspberry could be a carrier of the mold. So it just goes into my smoothie. And then if it's beyond, if it's like if you are the moldy strawberry, then you
Mm.
get fed to the worm. So I do vermicomposting at home, and we also have a vermicompost here at work, and so they are happy little eaters of the things that have gone bad.
Does verma mean worm?
Yep. Yep. So I've got two
Oh,
worm
wow.
composts at home, and they were doing really well at home. I had to create another worm bin, so I set one up here at in the kitchen. It's actually just outside the kitchen, but I feed my little poopsies and those piles with compost that I'm hoping to get into our little gardens here.
That is awesome. My growing up, my grandma had worms. That's how I first experienced composting was getting to run out and like throw stuff in a like big tub full of dirt. I would love to get something like that going here because especially when we're throwing stuff away that like
Yeah.
isn't a scrap that we can really save and use. I would like to get that going, but I feel like we don't really have a garden, so to speak. So there's kind of nowhere for it to go ultimately, but I
Sure.
almost just kind of want to do it for its own sake. I think also too, just we generate so much coffee grounds that it would be great to
Yeah,
have something to do with them that felt remotely productive.
totally. And I also see it. Maybe I'll never use this compost. Like maybe I won't. But for me, the worms have actually they've become kind of a pet. And when I go in there and I feed, because like if you have an aquarium, what
Mhm.
is that like? The fish are doing nothing for you. Like they're just sitting in this glass tank, and you're feeding them. They're not like it's not like you can cuddle them or whatever. But so then the worms are kind of the same. I when I go out there and I feed them. it makes me happy to see how fat they are, that they're happy and eating well, that they're inside of the little tubes of asparagus and nestled in the little avocado bowls. Proud mom.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we wish them the best. So coming, to wrap up, as you all have kind of navigated this time, and you are approaching, this the sort of starting to open stuff back up again, and doing all that in a really thoughtful way. Like, what are things that you feel like you guys have learned from the process of doing this, or what have your takeaways been so far? Obviously, knowing that you're still very much in the midst of it. I mean, you guys just did this first picnic thing this weekend.
Oh man, so I kind of giggled when you were saying as things are opening back up because things are closing back down, DC. I think I've lost track of the stages. I think we're like
Right.
in stage 3.5B, and we're working back to like stage 2.7C. So
Mm.
bars and restaurants open back up, and now they're shutting bars down this week. There's been a spike here in Boise, and positive tests in restaurants and bars here. And
Oh.
so last week, every day as we were like leading up to the picnic, and as we saw more and more cases, as we saw other restaurants shutting down, we're like, oh my God, like these like restaurants are shutting down. Meanwhile, we're launching our first event here at our space. And the owners, Chris and Ramey, and we were all like concerned about it, but Chris and Ramey, they pulled like the staff and like all of us who were here in the building, they pulled us all into a meeting. We're like, they were telling us like this is their concern, not really sure what to do. How do we feel? And all of us who were there felt confident and that we could pull this off. And the concerns that we did have were all things that were addressed, like even the night before. So I think it was Friday night, just like 18 hours before the event. One of the things I told Chris was, I like that we're doing this no contact thing, but from the diner perspective, if I was someone coming to the picnic, I would be concerned that there's the food in the tiffin sitting at the table, but I'm not sure if someone else, maybe they went there, maybe they touched it. Like maybe there was another guest who were like, oh, I'm going to sit here. And then they change their minds. They're going to sit somewhere else. And that would be one concern I would have. And I just kind of brought that up. And Chris and Ramey were like, okay, well, the solution is we'll get bottles of sanitizer, and we'll have bottles of sanitizer at every single table. So if people wanted to, they could spray everything down again. But we were constant. Every DC, every single concern that anyone had, like anyone on our staff had, was stuff that we worked through. And they were very intentional about making sure that we all felt safe doing this. And we, compared to other restaurants, we were much later in rolling out events here at our space. Like other restaurants, like they opened up as soon as like day one, they could open up the doors, they did. And, whatever. I think there was a lot of irresponsibility in some of that. But for us, we just wanted to make sure that, number one, our people were safe, that we all felt safe, and no one. And that's one of the things I love about Chris and Ramey. Like they're not going to open something just because they can. They're going to open something when we all feel good about it. And any concerns that we have will get addressed.
Yeah, I mean, I would say as somebody who is pretty darn obviously in this kind of situation, you sort of toggle between going like, I think I'm paranoid, but then sometimes in some days you go like, I think I'm just normal and safe. I'm not sure exactly what paranoid even means anymore in this environment. And obviously it's rapidly shifting, but like when you were describing, what this event looked like, and it's like, okay, it's, it's all zero contact and it's all completely outdoors and you're spaced apart and you go and the food's already there and it's placed and everything. that to me is the first time I've heard a description of like dining out in a during the pandemic world that I could conceive of being like, yeah, I would do that. I would feel comfortable with that. That sounds great. You know, like, and I'm a pretty high bar to clear for that stuff. I think I like when people were talking about like, you know, cause the reopening here in LA was like, or the shutdown or whatever you want to call it, the reopening or now like de-opening that we're in, like, LA was doing seemingly like being smart about it. And then like 2 weeks ago, just decided suddenly out of nowhere, like, hey, bars are open tonight, whatever. It's great. Like, and just, you almost couldn't believe it. Yeah. And just the idea of people, I don't know, something about just people packing into bars. You just think like, I don't get it. I don't understand it. So I'm not surprised that now we're, as a lot of people predicted, in this weird kind of like, okay, we started having the reopening conversation for some reason, and now we're back in this weird nether zone where, as you said, we're going back to like stage 2.7B or whatever it is. But I do think like it speaks so highly of you all that wasn't like this event was something that was like constantly being thought about and thoughtful. And it's like this experience that you're gaining and sort of how to navigate that and do stuff that can still like feel safe for people. And then people can still go and have a cool communal experience, which I know is really important to your team. You know, I think it's really neat. I don't know. I think the amount of creativity and thoughtfulness that you all are bringing to it is really neat, and it's cool. And it's what you would hope people are, thinking. It's the amount of thought you would hope people were putting into it if they're going to be serving you food, you know?
Yeah. Cause I mean, the reality right now is that, it's crazy. It boggles my mind that the way places are opening, cause we're in the same situation that we were back in March, you know, like right. there's this COVID is not going away. There's not a vaccine. So why are people acting like this has never happened? Like, why are we feeling like just because we can get outside and go to places where, you know, there's just a lot of irresponsibility. But we also want to figure out how can people still have these experiences? Like, how can we as a restaurant still do food, and how can people get food? How can people have this experience? And doing it as safely as possible. I guess dining is just going to look different. Going to bars and whatever, that experience is going to look different. We have to think about it creatively. And it was really important for me that when we were opening this past weekend, it was a big deal because I thought I work with an incredible group of people and we have this unique space. If we can't figure out how to pull this off, there's no one in Boise who can, you know, like, and it sounds, right. I don't know, I can't think of the word, but I just don't think that if we couldn't make this happen, that anyone else in Boise could have, you know, around here could have done it. And it was important to do it and to see that it can be done. Like, dining can be done safely. And what I was telling Chris this morning is out there, we had 60 guests the other day. And there's a good chance that one of them is carrying COVID. But I also felt very confident that if someone did have it, that it would not have been spread in the way that we had everyone laid out yesterday. Our zero contact with the guests, and even this morning we were talking about what are the other safety measures we can put in place to make it feel even safer. But I felt good about the quality of what we gave people and the safety of it all. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Well, I'm not going to take any more of your time because you're working on 4 different full-on restaurant projects right now. And I barely do anything most days right now, and I'm exhausted. So I can't imagine how you would feel. Michelle, thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you for sharing all of these experiences. It's thanks for taking the time. It's really cool. I'm thrilled that Haley and I know you and know the team, and we wish you all the best. And it sounds really fantastic. And it's neat that you guys are providing this for people.
Yeah, thank you, DC. Thanks for having me, and look forward to having you and Haley come to Boise and maybe do a kin event with us.
Oh yes, no, yeah. Our unofficial manager, Haley's mom, Margaret, is actively trying to book us for what would make sense for outdoor performance. I'm not sure. Maybe I just might have to dust off the alto sax I haven't played since middle school. Well, Haley has an empty guitar case. We'll see what we can do.
Yes, well, I look forward.
Thanks so much, Michelle. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You too, DC. Bye.
All right, that is it. That is all for this week's episode of Stay for Dinner. Thanks again to my guest, Michelle Kwak. I just really enjoyed talking to her. We wish her and the rest of the Kin crew all the best. Please rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast if you enjoyed this episode, wherever you get your podcasts. It really helps more people find the show, and that in turn helps there be more show. I am DC Pierson on Twitter, or at DEECEE Pierson on Instagram. If you decide to cook along at home, please tag me. I would love to see your food and hear how it went. My interstitial music is by Advance Bass, the amazing Owen Ashworth. The intro song is July 4th, 2004 by the amazing Jason Anderson, and the cover art is by Sarah Beacon. The amazing Sarah Beacon, that is Becan. I have written a couple of novels, The Boy Who Couldn't Sleep and Never Had To, and Crap Kingdom. Please support your local bookstore in whatever form they exist right now. Check those books out, and if you like hearing me talk, I read the audiobook versions of both of them, which is available on Audible or wherever you like to get audiobooks, including the library. Your local library might have a lot of free audiobooks right now. Just check them out. I think you might like them. That's all for now. Have a great week, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye.